A nice tight door closing on these old trucks is an awesome sound. Probably second only to firing up the motor. And so since the truck's running now, let's fire it up. Nice. So when I was replacing the weather stripping and everything on this door and the felts, I had a hard time finding any information out there as far as how to install all this, and it's a little bit tricky in these doors. So I've already done the driver's door, and there's a little bit of good old-fashioned Alabama cussing that went on with that. So I thought what I would do is kind of video the process in the passenger side door, so hopefully that'll help somebody out that's kind of looking for some guidance on how to put all this in. So that's what we're going to do on this episode. So let's get started. So these are the parts that we're going to be replacing. So we're going to replace the division bar, the anti-rattlers, the lower part of the window opening, the window seal, as well as the window channel felt. And so these three parts, the division bar, the anti-rattler, and this felt, comes with the anti-rattle kit. These are from Dennis Carpenter. They sell the vent window seal separate. So that's what we're going to be putting in today. Okay, so I've got the door obviously off the cab and just on a table here, so I've got good access to everything. I can work all the way around it. You may be installing your kit with the door installed, and it's a little bit different, I think, when you do it that way. But I can stand this door up if I need to get to a certain part of it. The anti-rattlers are usually a little bit easier to put in if the door is vertical. But I'll kind of go through that when we get to that part. So the first thing I'm going to do is just basically take off this access panel. There's going to be a whole lot of debris and everything down in the bottom of these doors. This is the first time this thing's been off, and looks like there's a mouse nest down in there and a bunch of other debris. I typically wait till I've got everything in before I vacuum all that out, clean that out, because as you're installing and working up here in the door, a lot of debris and stuff's going to fall down in the bottom of your door. So I'm just going to wait and do that at the end. So if you're doing both these doors at the same time, these little access panels, I just write drivers and then passenger on the inside of them, so I don't get them mixed up. They're probably should be exactly the same, but just to kind of keep them separate. So I've got a little helper with me today this morning. Lila's here helping. Say hi, Lila. So she's going to write that on there for me. Awesome. Thank you. Alright, we're going to put that aside. The next thing I'm going to do is basically take the handles off. You can leave I leave the door opening handle on, but definitely going to need to take the window crank handle off. So there's a little screw kind of right under the back part of the handle here. Just going to unscrew that. Lift the handle off. Put that aside. She's helping. The next thing I'm going to remove are these 4 screws that hold the window regulator in on the back side. And I do this by hand because these are pretty tight. Had been tight on the driver's door, and I nearly stripped it trying to take them out with power screwdriver. So
Can I try?
I'm going to do that by hand. I got that one loose, so Lyle's going to take the rest of that one out. While she's getting that one out, I'm going to loosen the others. Ugh. Really tight. No, let me get it. They're really tight. Okay, we'll get that one. Really tight. Okay, good. All right, hold on. I have it loose here. So these two are super tight. So I'm just going to shock them here. See if I can break them loose. Okay, got that one. Okay, there we go. Okay, looking in the door opening here, this is the division bar, and it's held in place by these two bolts here, a screw here. There's a screw right in the under the rubber part here of the vent window seal, and at the very top, two screws. Looks like one of mine's missing. Two screws in the very top here. That holds the division bar in place. That basically divides the window from the wing glass. And then on the back side here, the felt is held in place by this bar here that runs all the way up. The bar runs up here and stops, but then the felt kind of keeps running up all the way around, and I'll show you how that goes in when we get to that point. This bar here is held in place by these two screws here on the door jamb, and then one screw here at the top of the door jamb above the lock. So I'm going to go and take all those screws out, and then we can take get the window unhooked from the regulator here and take the window out. Okay, so we've got both these channels taken out. I put all the hardware to the side. So this division bar is kind of loose, and so we're just going to work the window out. So now the regulator arm separated from this lower channel. So I'm just going to try to work this out of the way for the moment. Get the window separated out of both channels. And then we'll get the window out. Morning.
Got you a condenser.
Oh wow, perfect. All right, just set it right there.
All right, man.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate
Have a good
it.
one.
Yeah, you too. FedEx man just delivered my new condenser. Awesome, so we'll try to get that in this weekend as well. All right, so I'm gonna just kind of work this a little bit more and then get this window out. Okay, the window is loose from the channel and it's basically just laying in the bottom of the door. So I'm just gonna leave it here until I get everything else out and then take that out last, because it's really challenging to kind of get it out with the division bar and these other track in here and the window regulator, and you don't want to risk breaking these windows. So we're going to take everything else out and then take that out last. So the next thing to come out is this window channel felt that runs all the way down into that bar by the door jamb. This is held in place by little kind of buttons. There's a couple on the top, a couple on the side here as well. So I just kind of grab it with some pliers and kind of start pulling it out. And it'll just pop right on out. Okay. Then ultimately has to go kind of back in through the door to come out. So that's out. Okay, next thing to come out are these anti-rattle bars. And these in my truck are really, really rusted. These are held in by little tabs. So you just gotta pry these out. If you're putting these on removing these or replacing these in a truck that's already painted, you want to be really careful you don't scratch your paint here. You can put some masking tape or something like that on both sides here, so as you're prying against it, you don't scratch your paint. But in this truck, it doesn't really matter, so just pull them out. Definitely needed to be replaced. What do you say? So this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little tab slots on both sides. So that's the outer one. We'll remove the inner one. Okay, we got the inner one removed now. And sometimes when you're prying these out, especially if yours aren't as rusty and corroded and rotten as mine, sometimes these little tabs can deform a little bit, these little slots. So you want to make sure that you kind of bend those back down if they do deform any. Otherwise, it's not going to retain your anti-rattle bar really close to the door edge. There may be a little bit of a gap there. So in a big fancy restoration, obviously you don't want that little gap there. You want that to look nice and tight. Okay, good shape. All right, so now that we've got those anti-rattle bars out, we can start to move this division bar back. And so that's kind of a key part of getting this division bar removed, just being able to move it back into this door opening. Okay, we're back looking on the inside of the access panel here now. Hope you can see okay, there's a little bit of a glare, but now that I can slide this division bar back, then I can get the regulator removed. Okay, so while I've got this out, I'm going to put some white lithium grease on these runners anywhere where the teeth and everything meet this little gear. I'll probably drop a little bit of oil down, see if I can get a little bit of oil kind of down into that little gear as well. Make sure this is working nice and smoothly, as well as put a little bit of lithium grease on this little bushing roller that rolls along the track. So I'm going to set that aside for now. We'll work on that in a bit. Okay, once I got the window regulator removed, then I'm going to take this little bar out in the back that the window felt, the channel felt fits in. Set that aside. Now I'm going to lift the glass out. Put the glass aside. We're going to make sure we clean this really well on both sides, because now's the time to do that. Get that window really nice and clean. Scrape all that gunk off. 56 years of gunk on that window. Put that glass in a safe place. And now we can get the division bar out, or at least kind of move to the point where we can start to get that removed. And again, it's kind of important to be able to get it moved back in this channel. And slide it kind of all the way down into the corner of the door down here. We're going to let it sit there just for a second until we get the vent glass out, because that's got to come out before we can get that division bar all the way out. Okay, the next step is to take the wing glass out and the frame for the wing glass. There's 2 screws right here on the door frame that holds that vent glass frame in. Once you take those out and you've got the screw that's removed out of the back of the division bar, this vent glass should just come right out. You got to make sure there's a little enlargement right here for where this spring comes through. So you gotta make sure that it comes through right there where that enlargement is. Set this aside in a safe place. All right, once we got the vent glass frame out, then the division bar can slide all the way down through and down into the door. Takes a little bit of fiddling to get it to drop in there. But now the top of the division bar is all the way up into this corner of the door frame, up by the hinges, and then you can take the back part of it out. And you kind of have to just work it out to bring the division bar all the way out. So the next thing I'm going to work on, I took the door off and set it aside off my workspace. I've got a soft pad up here to work on the glass. So I'm going to work on replacing the vent window seal. So in order to do that, we're going to take the vent window out of its frame, and it's held in place by this little hinge here. It's got a couple screws, and then the spring down here that controls the tension on the vent glass when it's open. It's just got like a little shaft that comes through the bottom, held on by a nut. It's got a couple little brass washers in here, very thin shims, brass shims, as this turns. So we'll take all that apart. We'll set this aside kind of in the order that it comes off. So there's a nut on the very bottom, the spring, okay? And then we've got to take these screws out of this top hinge to loosen this in order to bring that shaft through. Okay, set that aside. And now there's a little piece of metal on here that basically kind of controls how wide that thing opens. And so that kind of has to be kind of tapped off of there. So my window's kind of, shaft that's going up through my window is kind of rotten there. But in order to kind of get that off, you have to sort of tap that out. So I'm just going to use a little PB blaster on that. Kind of squirt that with some PB blaster there. Let that soak for a second. Alright, I'm going to tap that out. Alright, so that frees the frame up. And again, you want to kind of keep this in the order that it came apart. There's a little piece that goes on. It's got little serrations in there where it slides up on this shaft. It's got one way that it kind of basically can go in there. And controls kind of where that position, the window position is. Alright, so it looks like it's pretty rotten in my door. Looks like that's rusted out on both sides from where that's kind of kept in there. So it looks like I'm going to be replacing this vent window. Fortunately, I've got a spare set of doors from a 65 custom cab. And so I'm going to go up probably and rob the vent window out of one of those doors from the passenger side. Anyway, they're obviously side specific, so hopefully it's good in that door. I didn't anticipate that, but that's kind of what you run into. So we got to take our old seal out of this frame to get the new seal in. So in this truck, this seal is just like rock hard on the outside, just very brittle, kind of breaks apart. As you can see here, basically I'm just going to take a screwdriver, kind of run down along this channel and just pry this up and out. So with a screwdriver and a little bit of elbow grease, basically pry all that old vent window seal out. So I'm just going to hit this channel with a little wire brush, and we'll be ready to put our new vent window seal in. Obviously, if you're doing a show quality restoration, you're going to want to clean this up a whole lot more than I did. Make sure the frame is still nice and straight. Going to sight down it because you put a little bit of torque on this thing, peeling that old seal out. Make sure you didn't distort it or anything. We're ready to put our new seal in. This seal just basically just kind of snaps in or kind of pops in. It's got a few openings on it here where the screws go through to kind of hold it in, the vent window frame in, and then where the stem comes through at the bottom for the window, the stem that it turns on. It's going to come right through there. The screw that holds the frame in right there. Oh, sorry, the stem that goes, the vent window goes through is right there. So you got to make sure you get all that lined up. There's the two screw holes for where the upper hinge bracket goes on the outside of the frame right here. So it's all going to line up well. So we'll pop that in. Okay, so we're just getting the last bit of this vent window seal popped into the frame. And it's just basically self-retained, just pops right down into that little V channel of that frame. And I have to say, again, this is a Dennis Carpenter reproduction piece that I've been very impressed with. Dennis Carpenter's products, all the holes and everything are right where they need to be. And for a restoration quality job, very nice product. So, but if anyone from Dennis Carpenter is listening, what you really need on your website or on your YouTube channel is a how-to installation video for your anti-rattle kit. That would be very useful because unfortunately you don't have one on there. Alright, so that's pretty much ready to go. Again, all the holes are in the right place. So I'm going to set that aside until I have a chance to take the vent window out of my spare door, and we'll get that reassembled. Okay, we're back in business. So I got the spare door, passenger door down that my dad saved actually from a 65 that he had years ago that he ended up scrapping. Fortunately, he saved a lot of the body panel parts out of that truck, including the doors. And so the passenger side vent window is in good shape, I think. The stem is nice and tight, so we're going to put this in our wing glass frame. So back in business. Okay, so to get this in the frame, you just got to slide this down through this hole, obviously, on the right side, on the correct side. And then I've got the hardware that came off of the vent glass out of the 65. It's interesting, in later models they went with these little clear plastic washers. In my cab it's got little brass shims. Then I'm going to use the spring, the tension spring as well, because it seems to be not as compressed in the later door. Thank goodness my dad saved those doors years and years ago. And then these are the two little spline shims that are washers that kind of go in there as well as the nut. So once you slide that through, kind of the first thing that's going to go on is going to be this little washer that's got the tab on it, and it can only go on one way. It's got like a little relief in here that'll only allow that to kind of go on one way. If you look at the splines, you can kind of see where that wider part is, so you can get that lined up. I like to put just a little bit of lithium grease on this little shim just to allow that to work a little bit more easily. So that goes on next. So you slide that through until that little tab part engages, which can take a little bit of fiddling. Okay, so that and kind of gauge through there. Next thing that goes on is the next little shim, plastic shim. Lithium grease on there. And then finally this outer spline washer. And again, it's got a little relief on it also because it only allows it to go on one way. Okay, so that goes on. And I'm not going to put the nut on here yet until I get this upper part. You got to put this little hinge bit in here as well before you tighten this lower part up. So that's going to be the next thing that goes on. So here's mine with the screws. Again, I'm just going to put a little bit of lithium grease kind of down in this little pocket. Pop that in, bring it around, kind of get these screws lined up. And kind of just loosely get these screws started in here. You don't want to tighten these up quite yet, because everything's going to kind of move around, shift around a little bit as you tighten it up. These started in here. Okay, that's good enough. All right, back to, and sometimes this little seal wants to come out of that channel. All right, so back down to this part. The spring goes on next. Put a little bit more lithium grease down there where that spring works. And then finally the nut. And then this is going to be adjusted, the amount of tension that you put on this, so this thing doesn't flop around in the wind as you're kind of going down the road. So the good thing is you can kind of get to this in that access panel to tighten or loosen this a little bit. So I just kind of tighten it up to where it's pretty firm and then kind of leave it at that. All right, last thing is, whoops, lost a screw here, is we're going to tighten these up, and the vent glass will be ready to go back in the in the door. Just got to find out where that screw went. Oh, there it is. Back in here, and this vent glass seal just makes a big difference in how that fits together, how tight that is. That vent wing glass fits in that frame. Okay, there we go, ready to go in. So the next thing I want to do is work on the window, get this window cleaned up, especially the area at the bottom. The rest of it you can get good access to, but the area at the bottom, I want to get that really good and clean. So start off with a scraper, because a lot of times it's got a lot of stuff on here down under the anti-rattle bars. So I scrape off the bulk of it. On the inside it's not too bad, but then on the outside usually got a bunch of debris on this. So get that all scraped off. Well, the bulk of it off of there. Okay. We come back with some good quality glass cleaner. Get this nice and clean down here. Now's the time to do it. Hit it around the edges. At least I can get to the rest of it after I get it in the door and on the cab. Oh, there'll be lots of easy fingerprints on it at that point. But that gets it into a condition that's ready to go into the cab, into the door. So I've got the door back up on the work table here, but before I start putting the components back in, I'm going to change the lock cylinder out. So this is the passenger door, and in this truck, interestingly, only the passenger door had a lock cylinder in it. and both doors are lockable, but you could only lock it from the outside or unlock it from the outside on the passenger side. And I was a little bit curious to know why that was. And so I did a little research, and the only thing I was able to find out was that in some states or some cities, it was actually against the law to exit a vehicle from the driver's side. And in most small town cities, most of the parking was all kind of parallel parking. And so I guess it was just sort of a safety thing that Ford basically just put the lock cylinder on the passenger side, because I guess they were trying to encourage people to, or people were meant to exit a vehicle from the passenger door and lock it. But I wanted one in the driver's door, obviously, so I bought a door ignition lock set from Dennis Carpenter. So it comes with the ignition, the keyed ignition switch, which I swapped. This is the original one out of this truck. I swapped that out. That's the original key as well. So I've already put that in the ignition. I drilled the driver's door when I did the weather stripping and everything in the driver's door. I drilled it and put the lock set in that side. Not very difficult to do. It's basically just a 3/4 diameter hole, and then it's got a couple little tabs on the top and the bottom that it just took a little file to file out, so it fits in there well and doesn't turn when you turn the key. So then I'm just going to swap this lock cylinder out with the one from Dennis Carpenter, so then the key fits the ignition and both doors. So I'm going to do that while I've got access here. Pretty easy, pretty simple system in here. I also kind of robbed the door mechanism, the lock mechanism out of the 65 door, because in 65 they had lock cylinders on both the driver's and passenger door, interestingly enough. So fortunately, again, got some parts off of the driver's door of that 65 that I had, and so it just both locks, they're already set up on the inside. The lock mechanism here is set up to have a lock on both sides, so that all that was already there. So I'm going to swap that out. Okay, you got the new lock cylinder in there, and I just gave everything a good coating of the spray lithium grease on the inside here, so the mechanism and everything is lubed. So if you're putting any sound deadener in your truck, now is the time to put it in your doors. So I've got some of this peel and seal, which comes in the little strips, which actually makes it a lot easier to kind of put strips inside in the door. So I'm going to go ahead and put some peel and seal in these doors. Alright, so with all the peel and seal rolled in there, sound deadener in there, I just cleaned out the bottom, very bottom track there, vacuumed it out really well, and then sprayed some rubberized undercoating down in the very bottom channel where the water kind of drains out that gets down in this door. So hopefully it'll slow down the rusting process that's already pretty advanced in this door. Hopefully slow that from rusting any further. So now we're ready to start putting our components back in the door. So the first thing that's going to go in is going to be the window. It's going to lay in the bottom of the door. So I cleaned this bottom track that was fairly rusted and sprayed some white lithium grease on that. So we're just going to put that in, let that kind of lay right in the bottom of the door. Okay, the next thing that's going to go in is going to be the division bar. And here's something to check before you put the replacement division bar in. Make sure that your screws that go into these areas fit the reproduction piece, because in my case they didn't fit. And so what I did was I just took the captive nuts out of my old division bars and replaced the new captive nuts in the Dennis Carpenter piece with mine. And so that way I'm assured that my hardware is going to fit those nuts. The other thing is on my original division bar, the lower part was chrome metal here where the with a wing glass handle locked down, and the upper part was black. The Dennis Carpenter ones, the whole thing is chrome, which is kind of nice. It'll match my steering column. But another tip is if, especially if you're doing a show quality restoration, as you're inserting this piece into the door, leave this plastic coating on because it's going to minimize the potential scratches you're going to get on that chrome part. So that's the next thing that's going to go in. And to kind of get this in, it's a little tricky. You got to feed it up through to the top part of the window vent opening up here, and it's got to come through, partially come through that opening in order for this whole thing to clear. And so once it kind of goes through enough, it'll drop in, and then you can kind of rotate it up into position here. And again, I'm just leaving the plastic on. I can take that plastic coating off, you know, kind of once I've got it in position, which is pretty close right now. Okay, the next thing that's going to go in is going to be the vent glass frame. Before you get this division bar in place. So starting with the tension spring portion, again it's going to drop down through that opening in the door, kind of fit into that channel, and then it's going to slide up into the front part here. And I'm just going to loosely kind of put those two screws that are up here along the top in place, just so it doesn't fall out and break. I don't have another vent glass. Just kind of hold it in place, but I'm going to leave those loose because we're going to tighten that up in a little bit. You want to make sure that the rubber on the outside of the door, it's designed to kind of lay over top of the door on the outside. Make sure that's all kind of pulled out and laying in place before you get that thing really secured in there. So check the other side, make sure all that rubber is out. Okay. Okay, next thing to go in is going to be the window regulator. And so anywhere where there's friction points, I've just sprayed some white lithium grease on those areas, and it makes a huge difference in how these things operate. All right, so we're just going to feed that back into position. And just put a couple screws in here loosely. Hold that in place. Make sure the bar is on the right side. The arm is on the right side of your division bar. It's got to be on the inside of the division bar with respect to the cab, the interior of the cab, or it's not going to fit right. Get those screws placed. Okay. Okay, next thing we're going to do is get the division bar in place. So the first thing is I kind of work it up here to get where these two screws capture it up here at the top. And work it up into place. And then I can see the screw that goes right through the door panel here. Get that screw just loosely in place. And you get these upper screws in. And this division bar can be adjusted depending on the kind of fit and everything of the wing glass. A little bit, there's a little bit of adjustability in it, but so right now I'm just going to kind of leave it kind of loosely tightened there. And then we got the 2 bolts down here. I'm going to leave this part, lower part, kind of loose right now until I feed the window into the division bar, because you want it to flex just a little bit to be able to get that window fed in there. So I'm going to leave these 2 bolts out for now. Okay, now that we've got the division bar in here, the next thing to put in is going to be the anti-rattle bars right behind this. So let's get those put in. Pretty easy to put in. They just snap right in place. Inner and outer. Sometimes this is a little easier to do with the door standing up and kind of vertical, because sometimes they're a little hard to see kind of where these little tabs go. And you're working with it kind of like this, but it's not too bad. They just pop right in. There's not one to line up exactly right. Just slide it down some. That was not quite lining up with my opening. To pop these off again. Start over. Come here. There we go. Come on, come on, come on, come on. There we go. All right, let's get this back one in first. There we go. Man, that one does not want to go in. There we go. Got it. All right. Pop them in. There we go. All right, good. Inner one is in. Now for the outer one. Get in there. There we go. Like I said, sometimes if you bend those little slots a little bit when you're taking your old ones out, you have to go and kind of bend them again just so the new ones will fit in there well. And that chrome edge will be right up against your paint, right up against the door panel. All right, so those are in. So now I got my anti-rattle bars in here. The division bar is in. Then I'm going to tighten up the wing glass frame. I've got the seal on the outside of the door here all pulled out, so I can snug this up. And then put the screw that goes in the top part of this division bar down through this vent glass seal, right through that little hole, that little opening, and then into that captive nut. And that screw kind of pulls down to sit down below that vent seal. We'll leave that just a little bit loose because we're going to be flexing this division bar a little bit once we get the glass in the channel. So the final part of the window felt to go in is this long channel piece, and the lower part of it engages into this bar, and you can see there's a little tab right here, and that's designed to kind of seat down in the top part of this bar where that channel kind of slides in there like that and kind of locks into place right there. These come a little bit long, as you can see, because it goes beyond that channel. This channel's got like a little finger in there. I don't know if you can see that. There's a little finger that captures into the lower part of this felt. So since it's long, you've got to mark it and just trim that off. So the lower part of the felt will seat all the way down in the bottom part of this channel. So that's what I'll do now. Okay, so I've got it marked here where I need to cut it. I'm just going to take some tin snips, and we're just going to cut the lower part of that off. Okay, so now it should seat down into this channel where this upper part tab goes into this notch, and then that little finger can kind of engage the lower part of the felt. Alright, so it's seated in the very bottom there. We've got this engaged here. So now we're going to start feeding it through. But really, this lower part has to come through the top. I think it's easier to kind of come through the top, feed it down, and then engage it in this bar right before you mount it. Because again, remember we got to get the glass in here. So I'm basically just going to put the bar down here for now, and then we're going to start feeding this in from the top up here down along the channel. Okay, so I'm going to start feeding the lower part kind of down through here in between these anti-rattle bars, right down into the door. Slide it on through, and there's a couple little depressions here in this channel felt that you can see where the anti-rattle bar is kind of made up with it. So once you get down to that point, you know you're kind of down in there far enough. The other thing is there's again a little button. There's little buttons along here that kind of snaps in to the holes, the openings into the frame here, and so that way you know you're about where it needs to be. Once you get to the top part, so I'm not sure you can see that on the camera. Let me adjust it just a little bit. Once you get to the upper part here, it's got a bend. And so I just check to make sure that the buttons are right about the level where it needs to be kind of before I start bending it. And just kind of do like a little gradual bend. It's designed to bend here at the top to fit in here. So just give it a little gentle bend just so it kind of sits in that upper part of the channel there as we start working it in and getting it snapped into place. Okay, there you go. You heard that snap. So that lower button right there is in place. Next one up, snaps in place, and then just kind of gently work it back into the curvature of the window opening. And what you're going to have up here, and let me move the camera again so you can kind of see what we're talking about up here, is these little chrome pieces will start to protrude out as this bends. And so you're just going to have to get it to the edge here and then just cut it off. Cut these little chrome bits off. So I'll just snip these off at the edge, at the end of the trim here. So it'll fit right up against the division bar. Okay, snip those off. Now it'll kind of go up in here to fit up in the channel. Again, where those buttons are, make sure you get those buttons in there so they snap into place. There's a third one. And then the last one is right up here. Get that lined right up with that opening. There we go. Popped in. Alright, so all the window felt is in at the top. Okay, so before we mount this lower bar on this felt and secure that, we want to get the window actually worked into the division bar and the felt on this side. So I've kind of got it worked in there, and then I'm just going to basically slide the window up a little ways, and then get my door crank on here, because we've got to get the crank arm attached back in our channel here. And so I'll kind of slide that all the way down to the bottom to where I can work the window arm back into that channel. Okay, now it's back in. And then I'm just going to take the window all the way up and kind of out of the way. Alright, so now the window's all the way up. And so now I'm going to get this division bar attached to the felt on this back side here. And get that mounted, and then get my bolts in the division bar here. Okay, so I've got the window cranked back down now that I've got the bar on this side and in and secured. And if the window tends to get loose as it's all the way down, you can adjust the division bar just by pulling it tighter together to sort of squeeze the window at the bottom. And then tighten these bolts up. Basically, once it's nice and snug, it's secure at the bottom here. Oops. Okay, nice and tight, secure at the bottom. We crank it up. Nice smooth action all the way up and down. So the window stays tight at the bottom as well. Alright, so we'll get our access panel back on and get this door hung. So we're done. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode. It's probably going to be a very long episode. But I hope you found that useful for your build. Because again, I had a hard time finding some information on how all this goes together. I mean, sure, anybody that has any mechanical inclination can figure it out. But sometimes I find it's useful if you can find something that gives you a little bit of a stepwise direction in getting everything together. So again, hope you found that useful. Thanks for tuning in. Leave some comments if you like, and we'll see you next episode.